At this time, I would like to introduce our presenters. Jack Barber is a senior business consultant with Exotech. Jack brings 30 years of experience during his tenure at National Instruments, most of which focused on building the NI system integration business as the Alliance Program Manager. In his Alliance role, he recognized the critical importance of assisting Alliance partners to gain the business acumen necessary to manage and grow their organizations. He also spent 7 years in NI Global Services and Support to deliver large-scale solutions to NI's most strategic and demanding customers. Steve Conquergood is a senior business consultant with Exotech. Steve enjoyed a diverse engineering and management career for 40 years. He has been successful as an entrepreneur and inventor, holding North American patents across a range of subjects. Early in his career, he worked in manufacturing organizations and received extensive training in all aspects of project management. He has been responsible for teams in engineering and structural design, product development, quality assurance, process management, field applications, and monitoring. At this time, I'll turn it over to our distinguished presenters. Welcome, Steve and Jack.
Well, thank you, Holly. I appreciate this opportunity to share with the CSIA members. Hello, everyone in the audience. For those of you who aren't familiar with Exotech, we are the only company that focuses exclusively on business consulting for the control system integration industry. And while Exotech is well known for our collaboration with CSIA to found and develop the CSIA best practices and certification program, we offer a variety of consulting engagements to meet our clients' needs. Today, CSIA has asked us to talk about focus. What does it mean? How do you get it? And how you can incorporate it into your business so that your vision becomes a reality. In Al Ries's book, he discusses some keys to a good focus. First of all, a focus is simple. You must have a focus that makes sense to your customers, so it can't be complicated or difficult to understand. He points out that a good focus may be simple, but it is often hard for you to recognize. Secondly, a focus is memorable. That is, your customers should be able to remember it. If your customers can't remember what you stand for, what good does it take to take a stand at all? Also, a memorable focus often has an element of shock that helps it be more memorable. If it's a little unusual, maybe has a little bit of different wording on it, it can be easier to remember. A focus is often powerful. Now, some managers equate company size with power, but a larger company is not always more powerful. A highly focused company is more powerful than a less focused company. And a company focus can be powerful because it drives your employees to embrace your core business and makes it easier for your customers to recognize. A focus can be revolutionary, and it's often met with resistance within your organization because a focus often goes against your traditional thinking and how you've done things in the past. But remember, by narrowing your focus, you can create more opportunity and create efficiency in your organization. A focus is best when it has an enemy. Business is ultimately a competition. Any product or service sold by your company is a product or service not sold by someone else. If you have a well-identified enemy, you are more likely to devise a successful strategy to compete, less likely to get a surprise attack, and at least be able to mount a counterattack more swiftly. Focus is about the future. Ask yourself, what is the single product, service, or idea that provides you your best hope for the future? Most companies cling to the preconceived notion that they would like to keep all of their options open, right? But in selecting the one concept to focus on, while that is difficult, it allows you to make the best investments in your future. Focus can be as much internal as external. A focused company puts its best people and most of its resources into the products or services that represent the future. While you may have to deal with existing products or services, you make it clear that it's not in your long-term plans. And finally, focus, as he says it, is what we all really need. People tend to gravitate to the organizations with a strong focus. So too will your employees and your customers. Now, I'll invite Steve, if you've got some comments here based on your experience in running a system integration organization.
Yeah, I can complement that a bit, Jack. My experience in running my integration company, which started off with almost no focus, and over time as we grew, became quite focused on a specific sector. The most difficult thing about focus for me was that it meant saying no. And personally, I find that extremely difficult, and I think some others do too. It means saying no to some customers. So people come along with inquiries and say, can you do this? And if your business is focused, you have to say no to the customer requirements and potential profits and relationships. And that, is difficult. You have to say no to some of your staff. Quite often you have creative, strong leadership people working in your organization that come up with what seem like good ideas. And this focus can be difficult because you have to say, no, that's a good idea, but we're not going to do it. And so it sounds like focus might be bad in that way, but it's actually just the opposite. Focus really helps you to know when to say no and why you're saying no. So that's from my experience, why it's so important.
All right, thanks for that perspective, Steve. Now, Al Reese also goes on to start talking about what focus is not, which I think is useful. He says focus is not just a product. If you consider the automotive industry, the companies are not focused on just the car itself. Volvo is focused on safety, BMW on driving machines, Mercedes-Benz on prestige. It's not necessarily about the product itself and just its features. Secondly, focus is not an umbrella. And I think this is something that when companies first try to figure out their focus, they try to come up with an umbrella, a big idea that covers everything. But in the end, it ends up meaning nothing because it's too broad and doesn't create the focus. Focus by its very nature covers only the aspects of your business that represent the future. And as Steve kind of described, is a selection process where you end up saying no to other things based on that focus. Realize that focus does not appeal to everyone. There are always people who want something different, who want to choose what the majority doesn't want, but it's a mistake to try to appeal to everyone. Stay focused on your core and what you really want to provide to your customers. He actually says that focus is not hard to find. This is more as how you come up with your focus. Trying to develop a focus by committee can be difficult, if not impossible. So don't make the process for coming up with your focus too complex. He actually argues that it only really takes two people, one to think of the focus and the other to evaluate the focus. Quite frankly, and sometimes selling books, I think they go for dramatic appeal. I'm not sure you want to relegate it to just two people, but I do appreciate his perspective that you don't want to have a super complicated process to come up with your focus. And we'll talk more about how exactly to come up with that focus. Focus is not instantly successful. What tends to work in the short term doesn't usually work in the long term. So you will need to have the courage to make a focusing decision and then wait for the market to react to your move. It won't happen overnight. He also argues that focus is not a strategy. Strategies in and of themselves can be too broad and growth-oriented, leading to the company becoming unfocused, diversifying too soon, considering acquisitions, extending lines too far. Instead, focus implies narrowing of the business with the intent to dominate a particular segment. There's power when you can own a market. There's no power when you're a bit player. And finally, focus is not forever. Sooner or later, even the most powerful focus becomes obsolete. So eventually you will need to refocus. But that will likely change over decades rather than years. although it does depend somewhat on industry. A high-tech industry will typically wear out a focus much faster than a low-tech industry. So was the thoughts from Al Reese that I've echoed. Steve, do you have some comments based on your business experience?
Yeah, I think I can highlight a few more here too, and give some more specifics on why focus helps when you're running your company. So last time I talked about focus means saying no, but focus also means saying yes to some specific thing. So it means yes to growth. Typically, as Al Reese's book and as Jack has highlighted there, when you focus and dominate a particular sector, you're going to be able to grow larger than what you can just as a geographic generalist. And so that growth is a good thing. Providing it's managed well, you're going to be more profitable and enjoy the fruits of that growth. You're going to be working on projects, and you're going to be working in markets that suit your particular strength. So rather than doing, say, broadly everything for everybody, you're starting to work with customers and in markets that are suited to the particular skills and talents of your organization. You're going to say yes to higher quality when you're working on a very diverse range of things all at once. It's really hard to manage the top quality outcome of them all. But once you start to focus, you get more defined processes within the company. You start to see more repetition. You can build up specific tool sets that allow you to increase the quality of the work that you're going to produce for your customer. It means saying yes to support. One of the struggles for many integrators is managing both the development process for projects and for customers, as well as ongoing support of those projects that have already been delivered. And when you're more focused, it means that your range of applications is a little tighter. You can build up, again, support specific tools that allow you to provide higher quality, more timely support for your customers. So those are benefits to that. The other thing that I found was and I didn't anticipate this, but it was very enjoyable once you started to focus in a specific sector, that you started to build industry relationships with people rather than all of your projects and all of your activities being transactional. You started to attend industry conferences. You started to build relationships, sometimes with customers over long periods of time. And that, over a period of 5 or 10 years is really quite rewarding. So yeah, there's a lot of things with focus that you're going to say, yes, this is part of our focus. We're going to do this well. So that's it, Jack.
All right, appreciate that, Steve. Okay, so let's move on to how you identify your focus. So I'll borrow here. Let's go to Jeffrey Ton. He's the author of River and Thoughts, who lends his perspective. He says, to distinguish yourself in a saturated market, you need to find a niche on which to focus. Then you can define your true worth so that you can survive in a competitive landscape. And I know this has been true somewhat in the kind of background I come from for National Instruments and the Alliance Partners. There was a time at which being an expert in the NI platform, and LabVIEW in particular, was differentiated. But over time, as more people have learned that, they have to further distinguish themselves, not just as LabVIEW experts, but how they can apply that LabVIEW knowledge to a specific area that really differentiates them. So he recommends asking yourself the following questions. First of all, what do your customers want? To set yourself apart from the competition, look to your clients first. Identify their problems more than focusing on your own expertise. Focus on their problems that you uniquely solve, and make sure that your product or service meets that customer's needs. Because in the end, it's really about what your customers want as much as it is what you're capable of. Secondly, what will this offering drive profit? Once you've landed on a product or services that stands out to your customers, explore, quite frankly, whether the offering will be profitable. If it's differentiated and you can charge enough value for it and get the returns you want, you're in line for success. If not, obviously, you'll need to reconsider. Third question he suggests asking is, does it align with your long-term vision? Defining a niche will inevitably reposition your immediate areas of focus, but it shouldn't compromise your mission that you have committed to as part of your long-term goals. If your new focus hinders the achievement of your larger goals, then obviously it may not be the best area to focus in. So not just, a flash in the pan or something that's just short for the day and convenient, but something that really fits what your long-term strategy is. And finally, are you willing to test and adjust? There's no guarantee that something will be 100% right first time around. You will need to make some minor adjustments. So test your focus with your clients, even those, if you can, who chose not to use your product or service in the past. Does this resonate in a way that they would come back to you? Then pivot accordingly to make sure that your new niche, your new focus is truly benefiting your customers. So I'll reference one more resource for you. In Gino Wickman's book, Traction, he declares that your focus consists of two things: your purpose and your niche, and you must define these with absolute clarity. So let's take a look at these two things in more detail. First of all, with respect to your purpose, or some say your passion or your cause, he suggests that it should not be business or market oriented, but rather a core ideal. And he even provides a checklist for you. First of all, your purpose should be stated in 3 to 7 words and in simple language. It should be big and bold and have what he calls the aha effect, meaning, of course, that makes sense. It should come from the heart and resonate with both you, your employees, and your customers. And finally, it shouldn't really be about money, and it's not just a goal. It's something larger. It's your mission. So given that I worked with National Instruments for 30 years, I thought we could think about NI's mission and see how it fits this definition of your purpose. So NI's mission is to improve the world by empowering engineers and scientists. If we go through Gino's checklist, it's actually 8 words, but let's give them a little bit of break. It's close. It's certainly simple language enough. Big and bold, improving the world, that sounds like a big goal. The aha effect, at least for those of us technologists, the idea of empowering engineers and scientists to improve the world seems to make sense. If you know National Instruments at all, that certainly comes from the heart, and the employees and the leadership really get this as their mission. And it's certainly not just about money, and it sounds like improving the world is certainly bigger than just a mere goal. So I would give them a check mark and say that this is a good example of a purpose for a company. Okay, let's move on to the second aspect where Gino says your purpose and your niche. So let's talk about defining your niche. First of all, consider, what do your clients say that you do better than anyone else? Because if your customer can recognize your unique value, it will be easier to define your leadership position in that area. And then you can use that as a filtering mechanism for making decisions that are consistent with your value and meeting your customers' needs. Secondly, your niche should be difficult for your competitors to claim. In fact, ideally, your competitors will have to say just the opposite. For instance, if your competitors can't compete with you on your high quality, they may need to compete on being lower cost. Finally, when determining your niche, consider that the most companies profit from their core. Alex Davern, NI COO, is fond of saying your best performing business unit is likely your most under potential. So you should think about doubling down and investing more in your core business rather than straying to your adjacencies too soon. That's why under Alex's direction, NI recently defined their niche to be the leaders in software-defined automated test and automated measurement systems. So let's see how that stacks up against the criterion here. Do NI's clients say that they do that better than anyone else? If you look at surveys and whatnot, NI is certainly recognized by the market as being a leader in automated test, data acquisition, and measurement systems. Is it difficult for their customers or their competitors to claim? Certainly the software-defined aspect has always been a differentiator for National Instruments, so having that in their defined niche is certainly valuable. And NI has been in the business of automated test and automated measurements for essentially the entire career I was there, so certainly core to their business. So I give them checks. It's less about giving NI's checks and more to kind of give you an example of companies who have stated their mission and stated their niche and how well it meets the criterion that we've suggested here. Okay, so the other thing I'll mention in respect to Gino Wickman's book Traction is, in addition to helping identify your vision and your passion and your niche, Wickman also defines 5 additional elements which he calls part of the entrepreneurial operating system. Now, quite frankly, we could spend a session on each of these and don't have the time right now. So let me just briefly describe them to you. So one of the components is the people component, and it's how do you get the right people in the right seats and make sure of 3 things: that they get it, meaning that they understand their respective objectives, that they want it, meaning they're motivated to achieve those objectives, and ultimately that they're capable of doing it, because surrounding yourself with good people is essential to your success. Next, he defines the data component, and I like that he says that there's safety in numbers, if you get that. It's that he's stressing that it is essential to define measurable KPIs and maintain a dashboard for your leadership to constantly evaluate the performance of your organization. I also like that he recognizes that there's an issue component, and he specifically calls out the issues as something different from the rest. So the issues component is asking you to take a hard look at what is holding your company back and actually have a process defined to identify what those issues are, be able to discuss them in your leadership, and ultimately resolve them so your organization can move forward. I think many organizations miss this aspect. They're so focused on just achieving their objectives, they don't stop and recognize what is keeping them from achieving those objectives. And then, of course, there's a process component. It's critically important for you to document your core processes. If you can't describe your core processes, then you can't make them more efficient. But it's really the final element that, given our limited time, that we wanted to talk to you about today, which is what he calls the traction component. So in the traction component, it's often the weakest link in an organization, and it's the inability to turn your vision into a business reality that really holds you back. So how do you get traction? How do you really get your organization to move forward on what your focus is and where you're trying to drive the organization? He points out 2 main things. One is accountability. So accountability in your organization is defining what needs to get done and who is responsible for seeing that it gets done. It's not that they have to do it themselves, but ultimately for each one of your objectives, there should ultimately be one person responsible for seeing that it gets done. Secondly, what he describes as discipline, which has a combination of creating an effective organization and fostering efficient communication to create the discipline required for your organization to gain traction. And in that discipline, there's kind of 2 main aspects of that. One is having a process to identify what he calls rocks, which is the 3 to 7 most important things that must get done in the next 90 days. So in order, once you set upon your focus and you've set your direction, what are the 3 to 7 most important things that you need to get done to align with that focus and move that direction? And secondly, maintaining what he calls a meaning pulse, which is instituting an annual, quarterly, and weekly meetings in which you work on your business, not just in your business. In my opinion, this is perhaps the biggest challenge that system integrators face. They are so busy working on their projects, and the customer is always king, and there's always pressure to get project work done, but they never take the time to focus on their business. So having the rigor that's described here to identify the on-business issues and then have the process through the meeting pulse of being able to focus on those and make progress on those is essential for you to take advantage of your focus and get down the path.
So Jack, I might just chime in with a few more comments on that topic.
Sure.
Yeah, appreciate that. So the part of focusing that I found difficult in running my integration company was that these two roles, and actually Gino in his book Traction, we highly recommend people get this book. It describes many of the issues that we see in system integration companies around, and so within the EOS components and description that Gino has in his book, he describes two key roles. One he calls the visionary. So in the upper right-hand corner of his circle diagram there, you see vision. Well, there's typically a person, and it's often the founder of the integration company that represents that visionary role, the real leader who's thinking far into the future, who sees opportunities that other people don't see, quite often the entrepreneur. And then down in the lower left, almost opposite on the circle there, you see this traction. And Gino describes that person as the integrator within the integration company for us. Mm-hmm. And so that integrator is typically a manager. He's someone who's going to achieve whatever. It's like, tell me what to do and I will get it done. And of course, those two roles, when a company starts off small, typically the founder has to fulfill both of those roles, but they don't often come with real strength in any one person. So for my example, I really was the visionary person. I was the person who saw opportunities that other people didn't see earlier than other people saw them, perhaps is a better way of saying that. And yet I am not anyone's manager. I just like that skill set for me is really quite weak. And so what makes focus so difficult to get in a business is that it takes a combination of both of these two things. You have to have the vision, you have to have the leadership, the person who's out there, groundbreaking ideas, groundbreaking principles, the ways of doing things, and yet at the same time, someone has to follow up with it. And so this focus in a business is difficult because you need both of those sorts of things. And that's why it's so important too, as Jack's gone through in the slide in describing, okay, you do have to have this traction, you have to have this accountability, you have to have a planning cycle, you have to have all this discipline. And for many business leaders, those are not their strengths. So anyway, it's a great topic. We certainly welcome questions, thoughts that you have about that. We actually love to talk about this topic. That's it. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Steve. So let me wrap up. Just how do you incorporate this into your strategic planning process? So at the risk of referencing Gino Wickman's book, Traction, one more time, it is a good example. He has what he calls the Vision and Traction Organizer to assist in your strategic planning process. So if you don't have an established methodology for strategic planning, we'd recommend this methodology, which includes the following steps. So we've talked a lot about focus today. Actually, you should start with your core values. So what is it that is kind of personality of your company and what you want your company to live up to? So there's a discussion and exercises in the book on how to develop your core values if you don't have those already, or at least revisit them and make sure that they're still represent your organization and where you want it ultimately to be. And then you can really dive into your focus and establish your purpose and your niche. Once that's done, the next step is to envision where you want to be 10 years from now. And this is intentionally set out there as a way out there goal. So you can't just simply extrapolate where you are today and do the math and say, okay, here's where we're going to be. Really want you to kind of suspend reality and say, dream big. Where, almost regardless of where we are today, where do we want to be 10 years from now? Once you have that 10-year target, then you can formulate your strategy for getting there. And that's kind of still pretty big picture on that strategy. How do you differentiate yourself? How are you going to get there? That sort of thing. And then based on your strategy, then you start setting more concrete things. Start with your 3-year picture of what you want your business to look like. This should be more tangible, essentially the stepping stones for how you're going to get to your 10-year target. From that, then you back down and here's our 1-year plan. And that should be pretty concrete with specific outcomes, that what needs to get done in the next year and what metrics you're going to judge yourself by to say that we're actually moving forward as an organization. Once you have your 1-year plan, it becomes that much more obvious, okay, if we want to accomplish this in the next year, what do we have to get done, our quarterly rocks in the next 90 days? And make sure those are assigned and that you have the discipline, the communication and the meetings in place to actually see that work is going to get done, and not that you get to the end of the 90 days and go, oh yeah, well, we didn't really get to that. And then lastly, and I'll emphasize this again, is the issues. Even in a small organization like Exotech, we see this is, you get stymied by issues that are preventing your organization from moving forward. And you can either choose to ignore those or make that part of your company's process, which is we have a process to identify what issues are keeping us from moving forward, take the time to discuss those and come up with plans to resolve them so they don't continue to hold you back. Given our limited time this morning, that was really the material that we wanted to present you at this time. I realize it's hard to, give you a good focus in a 30-minute period of time, but at least hopefully we've provided you with some information. Recommend buying the books that I've referenced here. And of course, you can always feel free to contact Exotech if you feel like we can be of service and assistance in helping you achieve your focus and your business goals. So with that, Holly, I guess
thanks, Jack. I might
just you see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Jack.
Steve, let me just
interject. Jack, I got one more thought. Just before we get into questions and answers, I'd really like to make a specific recommendation for people because we've presented a lot of material. There's a lot of really good concepts and good hints contained in there, but what do you do next? What are you actually going to take away from this webinar that's going to help you drive your business forward? So the very first thing I recommend is right now, during the question and answer session here, write down, make a note or write down, if that's your way, of which 2 items during the presentation really resonated for you. Which things made an impact that you can say, this would help me develop focus in my business. Write those 2 things down today. And then make a calendar appointment for yourself exactly 1 week from now. Next Thursday morning, you're going to sit down, have a meeting. It could be yourself, depending on the size of your company. It could be yourself, could be your leadership team, whatever you think is appropriate. Set a meeting and answer this question. Is the focus of your business correct? It's not a black and white thing, do we have a focus, yes or no? It's more in-depth than that. But the question is the focus of your business correct? And I think if you do those 2 things, you'll be well on your way to taking advantage of the material you've heard today and getting better focused in your business. Okay, now back to Q&A.
Sure, so we'll leave it open for some questions. I guess while you guys are formulating any questions that you might have, I would say in giving this presentation before, one of the more common questions that I get is, is this focusing effort applicable for a small company? And I guess I can most relate it to to Exotech itself. I mean, we're a relatively small company, primarily 4 consultants that form the basis of Exotech. And we went through this process ourselves back in August after Steve and I had come on board. We went through the traction process, essentially the 8 steps outlined in this last slide for you. I guess it's the second to last slide, this one. So we went through this process, and it was enormously helpful in having us agree on what our core values are, where we should be focusing, which is in this area, which is business consulting for specifically system integrators in our industry, and where we want to be 10 years from now and how we're going to get there, and what do we have to get done as a small organization, and what's holding us back from getting there. All of those really useful, even if you're a small company, to go through the formality of a strategic planning process, establish your focus, and have the best chance of actually realizing your business vision as opposed to leaving it to chance, which I think, Steve, if you want to elaborate, is when you're just going after everything that comes your way, it's difficult to get the traction that's described and be able to come up with repeatable success and differentiate yourself in a way to drive more value for your customers, which will in turn help you to grow your business.
Yeah, I don't have too much specific to add on that, Jack, but I would say, I think my example of growing my company was quite typical. We started as a small regional geographic generalist. We would build automation projects for almost anybody we could reach. And then over the period of 5 to 10 years, especially as we grew to 20, certainly once we got to 30, 40 people, we recognized that we could not sustain that across multiple offices, across multiple geographies. The support cost was too high, the risk was too high. So focusing really, and really it was Don Roberts and Exotech who helped us learn that wasn't going to be sustainable in the long term, and guided us through the process of focusing on a particular industrial sector, which continued our growth curve, and eventually the company was sold successfully. So I think that's ours is a good model. It's a very important topic.
Super. Thanks for that, Steve. All right, I have a question from Pamela here. So let me just read it for the recording purposes. In your experience, how important is it that the integrator be a single person instead of a team, or does that matter? So I think when you're saying integrator here, it's the concept that Steve was describing, that within an organization you have the role of a visionary and an integrator. She says parenthetically, our difficulty is we have a team, so I feel like accountability is lacking. We get caught up in the business when we get together. Steve, you want to? Well,
Pamela, you're in good hands, because it's absolutely common. Thank you for raising the question, because it is completely normal in business, and particularly system integrators. I don't think, well, there's pros and cons like everything. The beauty of having the integrator be one identified person is that the buck absolutely stops there. There's absolute clarity, and that's great. On the other hand, in a smaller company especially, and with a team environment, it sort of goes against the culture. That's not really the way things work. And so what I would suggest in that case is that you define portions of each. You're bound to have some people who are identified leaders, team leaders, maybe the software team leader, the hardware team leader, the engineering manager, whatever job titles those people would have. I would define portions of their roles that are the integrator portion of that role. Okay, Mr. Engineering Manager, these are the things that we need you to be accountable for. These are the rocks. These are the 90-day and the 1-year goals that if we're going to drive this company forward, we have to have these particular things done. And so I would spread it out across the team, but make sure that it's rigorously written down and defined and clear to everyone so that it isn't fuzzy or blurred. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, to that, Steve, I'll add, when I think about the integrator role, I think of it as the person who's kind of facilitating this process. So yes, the buck ultimately stops with that person, but that person is executing and creating an environment and the processes by which this traction takes place. So he's the one responsible, he or she's the one responsible for, setting the meeting pulse, working, facilitating to make sure that the rocks are defined, but then the actual assignment of those rocks and who's accountable for them are folks that are on the leadership team. And in that sense, I think it can work in the environment that Pam was describing, that the integrator is going to, I won't say delegate, but facilitate which are the rocks that need to get done, how they're going to get measured, facilitate when issues arise, that they're identified. All those aspects are what an integrator is doing to drive the organization forward. But of course, the organization, the leaders, the team within is taking responsibility for particular objectives and are ultimately responsible for seeing that objective gets done, whether they're actually working on that objective or they're the sponsor or the person responsible for saying that objective, that rock, gets moved forward. Great question, Pam.
I think it was a good, and I think, Jack, your answer was probably better. It is in the way you described it there, it is important that there is one person who really is the master integrator. That person, as you say, lots of facilitating and delegation, but yeah, one person has to be responsible for the overall results on that process, on that stage. And then the second point about we get caught up in the business when we get together, I think is also key, because that I mean, I can't help but chuckle because we do. I mean, we have decades of experience growing and running integration companies. We've participated and helped coach and guide hundreds of integration companies, and yet, when we have our meeting, it's a challenge. So I think it's a discipline. It's something you should be conscious of. It's like, okay, this meeting today we're going to schedule is a meeting that's working on the business, not in the business. It's not which delivery is late, which person is quitting next quarter and can we replace them. It's not in the business topics. We're going to have a meeting to talk about traction and focus and strategy and planning. We're going to work on our business, and you just have to practice and practice and practice that discipline, and you will get better at it for sure.
Yep. I mean, and even in the context of Exotech and our regular meetings, we have to remind ourselves that, hey, we're going down the rabbit hole. We're getting too much in the business. Let's take that offline. This meeting's supposed to be the on business issues. Let's get back to checking our status on these. Which one is everything moving forward? Are we encountering issues? How do we continue to move forward? All right. Any other questions? Okay. In absence of any other questions, I just want to wrap up. And on behalf of Exotech, we certainly appreciate your time today. Hope that you found the information useful. And if Exotech can be of any assistance to you and helping your organization meet your objectives and overcome your challenges, please feel free to contact us at exotech.com. And just for your reference sake, each of us at Exotech is just our name, Jack Barber, no space, no dot, just Jack Barber at exotech.com. Or Steve Conkergood at exotech.com. You can reach all of us directly that way.
Okay, that was great. On behalf of CSIA, I would like to thank Steve and Jack for this enlightening discussion, and I'd also like to thank all of those attending. We hope you found the webinar informational. As a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be made available for viewing within 30 days of this event. Please visit the CSIA website to view this recording or a past webinar you may have missed. This concludes our program for today. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you have a good afternoon.